Hey there, this is Introduction to Graphic Design, our final episode, and we're talking about postmodernism with a little bit of digital technology. I'm Alva Lynn Lundgren. Postmodernism is a response and an outgrowth to modernism. To really understand what postmodernism is all about, you have to first understand that it's a worldview. It's not an art movement. It's not a design movement. It is an approach to life and understanding how the world is and how the world works that's different from the modern approach. Modernism was rooted in classical study, in logic, reason, humanism, and somewhat in religions and faith. Postmodern is a different thing altogether. And postmodernism sometimes clashes with a modernism way of thinking. So basically in postmodernism, you can kind of say that anything's allowed, anything goes. So it's a worldview that emerged in the 70s after the social revolution of the 1960s. It's not clearly defined. It covers a wide range of disciplines and areas of thought. In other words, there's postmodern psychology, there's a postmodern approach to learning math, there's a postmodern approach to education and to music and to dance and argument, so it's not just art and design. It rejects boundaries. It's not that boundaries are made to be broken, it's more like boundaries don't exist. And that's a different understanding. It's kind of like, the phrase of, creativity is thinking outside of the box. The postmodern idea is that the box doesn't exist. Postmodern thinking rejects things that are considered traditional. It rejects tradition and rigid order. There's a focus on ambiguity. It is okay for two things that contradict to both be considered true. And because it rejects tradition and prefers ambiguity, it will reject anything that is deemed absolute. Within postmodernism, there's the idea of deconstruction. And this happens a lot in architecture, but it also happens in design, basically taking what already exists, breaking it apart, fragmenting it, exploding it, and then reconstructing something out of it that's not the same as the thing that was deconstructed. In postmodernism, all points of view are considered equally valid, and it's very much subjective. Reality is based on an individual's thoughts, opinions, and feelings about it. So you can see how all of these ideas come into play in specific ways in postmodern mindset. There's a clear distinction between modern graphic design, the idea of modernism, the Swiss style, the New York school, Art Nouveau, Art Deco, futurism, objectivism, all those isms, and the postmodern idea. So let's look at what postmodern graphic design actually looks like. It uses layering and interpenetration. Interpenetration is transparency. The interweaving of visual planes and transparent planes, transparent layers are very characteristic of postmodern graphic design. We see that here in this poster where we have transparent red shapes superimposed upon the achromatic colors, but we can see right through the red. So that's a sense of transparency. The red layer is seen as being in front of the white layers and the black layers and the gray layer in the background. There's a focus on visual texture and textural contrast. So in this Rico lens, we see a variety of different textures, kind of distressed, kind of grunged, hand-drawn. There is smooth texture, there's rough texture. And that all adds to the overall sense of the design. The texture here doesn't sit in the background. It actually helps the design to communicate. A loosely formed structure. There's a lot of informal structuring underneath a composition. Elements in the visual composition will actually shift off the grid, but you still get a sense of the grid. Asymmetry is preferred over symmetry because there's more dynamic quality to asymmetric balance than there is to symmetric balance. The changing of typefaces within a single word, running words together, changing color within a single word, differentiating words within a joined phrase by color or weight, loose kerning or letter spacing, All of these are typical of postmodern typographic sensibility. So in this April Greiman, we see the words made up of different letter forms. Everything still is unified, it still works together, but this is a very postmodern approach to a poster design. Also, notice the layering. Notice a sense of grid and things shifting off the grid. April Greiman, by the way, was an early adopter of the computer, the Macintosh, for graphic design production and creativity. She was part of the New Wave design movement in the early 80s. She used bitmap fonts and combined typography with techno patterns and shapes. A lot of geometry in her work, a lot of layering, a lot of textural patterns, like right in here. Collage, of course, is taking bits and pieces from existing things and bringing them into a design. And along with that, we have pastiche, which is borrowing from existing design and artwork. The use of hand-drawn letter forms instead of typography or in combination with typography. This book cover doesn't have one piece of typography in it. It is all hand lettering and illustration. An ornament is bits of decorative design that are used to augment, fill space, create depth. They can be foreground, they can be background. Marion Bantes is very much involved in the use of ornament and texture. And she combines hand-drawn lettering with digital typography, pattern, and ornament. In this case, there's a sense of layering, but there's also a very strong grid that the layers weave in and out of. Turning typography on its side is another postmodern idea. Process is very much important. How you get to where you want to go, it's preferred that process is apparent in the finished work in some way. Postmodern graphic design deals more with idea than storytelling, generally speaking. So it creates a concept, and then the narrative supports the concept. The story supports the idea. Looking at this David Carson piece, this is a 2-page spread from Ray Gun magazine from the mid-90s. Text type and negative space. The negative space is definitely shaped by the text blocks. Photographic images that have been highly manipulated digitally wrap around and sit actually in front of some of the text blocks. Negative space becomes very apparent in this piece. This idea is very postmodern, as well as minimizing the borders and running the type pretty much against the edge of the page. We also see layering and transparency in here, layering and transparency in here. And then the title runs not as a headline, but is almost a secondary element in the overall design of the article. Rolling Stone magazine has been a showcase for design and designers in publication and editorial design, as well as illustrators and photographers. So here we have the use of pastiche, the blocky sans serif letter forms that recall the Russian constructivist period. Some of the letter forms are reversed, which refers to the Cyrillic alphabet that's used in Russia. The entire page on the left-hand side of the spread is the headline. And then the entire right-hand side is the illustration, and then the article begins on the next page. Wired magazine is still a really good place to keep track of design trends, not just in terms of the article, but in terms of how the magazine is laid out. So here we have postmodern text design. It's a balanced page. It's a structured page. It uses fluorescent color. This uses fluorescent colors, superimposes a face-forward portrait on a profile. So there's a sense of layering and movement. The use of typography here, shifting it off-grid, angling it, changing the color, separating the word Sundance into various parts of individual panels, sense of layering, a sense of borrowed images, digital collage, texture, visual texture down here, visual texture up here. This is an earlier interactive design calendar, and it's a still shot of the interactive calendar, and basically you have all these numbers floating and layered on each other, and then this is the current week. Motion graphics which is hard to see in still photos, but you still get the idea because motion graphics begins as storyboarding and still imagery. Motion graphics is one area where designers can expand their capability. And you can be a graphic designer and have a lot to do with creating motion and animation, title sequences, animated films, even animated GIFs. Digital technology has allowed digital title sequences to break ground in postmodern understanding in terms of bringing together, especially in this case, a variety of visual effects, a variety of stills, and a variety of ideas that actually tell the story within the title design before you even get to the actual narrative of the film or the television show. So this is from the Spider-Man title sequence. Another well-known title design, motion graphics, is the Mad Men opening sequence. This is the main title design for a movie called Kiss Kiss Bang Bang back in the mid-2000s, borrowing actually a lot from Saul Bass sensibility and also from the 007 title sequences. But notice the use of transparency, the sense of collage borrowing from existing images, decorative ornamental elements, distressed typography, texture, accidental shapes, layering, transparency. This is a dynamic display of financial information for the Bloomberg headquarters in New York. It makes the display of the data and stock information interesting. It's a landing page for a well-known German design agency using layering, using a sense of collage, the cutout figure, the illustration in the background, the texture, the pastiche of the almost Western slab serif type. Digital design has bloomed. It has basically exploded in the postmodern age. The idea or the concept of information architecture is the foundation for any sort of user experience, graphic design, web design, gaming, interactive media. And with information architecture, designers will focus on taking complex information and giving it order and structure, making it understandable. So you not only make it comfortable and agreeable, you make it easy for them to and enjoy the process. So information architecture has to be a foundational element to graphic and interactive design. We're obviously very familiar with the World Wide Web. It is that part of the internet where information is organized and sorted and made accessible, whether it's images, sound, animation, video, or text. In 1990, a physicist named Tim Berners-Lee, and no, it wasn't Al Gore who invented the World Wide Web, it was Tim Berners-Lee, a physicist, developed the three building blocks of the web, which include the Hypertext Transfer Protocol, which is HTTP, Hypertext Markup Language, which is HTML, and a way of specifying or locating every single file on the web, which is called the URL, or the Uniform Resource Locator. Every time you post a file on the web, every time you build a website, everything that you put on the web has its own specific URL. Interactive media. Expand your graphic design opportunities. Anytime there is interactive media, especially on the web, there is code or hypertext behind it. That gives it its functionality. It's not just the visual stuff, it has to function in some way. So it's the hypertext that makes it interactive. That actually expands your opportunities as a graphic designer because it gives you more ability to ask what if and also what else or what's next. And you can expand your own capabilities into the interactive area and bring that together with traditional graphic design methods. The basic structural methods of interactive media are the linear series, spatial zoom, parallel text, overlays, hierarchies, matrices, website structures. So there's a lot of layers that you are able to play with. So interactive media is anything that the user or audience is going to directly involve themselves in for their own type of experience. Interactive media involves both digital and print design, and it's become integral to overall branding and marketing strategies for businesses and organizations. Interactive media has allowed smaller businesses and organizations to target and communicate with their audiences and to market their products and services in a much less expensive, more direct way. So we can go around advertising and paid placement into direct activity with the desired audience. Another aspect of postmodernism and technology is digital imaging, and basically that is the idea of image manipulation. With digital imaging software, such as Photoshop, you can achieve seamless image manipulation. And because of that, photography is no longer considered an undisputed documentation of what's real, because photographs are so easily manipulated. So it's changed what photography is and its role in verifying reality. A single photo may include upwards of 100 separate image layers within a Photoshop file. Notice in this there's a loose grid, there is framing, there is layering, there is transparency, there is typographic effects. So the boundaries between photography, illustration, and fine art, and between designer, illustrator, and photographer are blurred. These disciplines are more and more blended. Also within the digital realm, we have augmented and virtual reality, and these are still emerging technologies at the time of this recording. Augmented reality, also known as AR, is where there is the live manipulation of the real-world environment using computer-generated sensory input. The user's view of reality is modified either directly or indirectly. The game, the app Pokemon Go uses augmented reality. You get out and walk in your neighborhood and look for all the Pokemon and collect them, and you have virtual battles and things like that. But you can superimpose it over the reality of the scene in front of you, whether it's a parking lot or a cafe or the front of an office building. Virtual reality is where the user is put into a separate experience, where an environment is created visually and sensorially for the user, and they are actually separated from reality as they experience the virtual world. So virtual reality is not just visual and audio, it is a multi-sensory idea. You are immersed in these virtual worlds or these virtual environments by use of special devices. Mixed reality merges digital and physical worlds in a larger way. It uses both AR and VR. With mixed reality, you have the immersive capabilities of a, shall we say, head-mounted VR set, and the ability of augmented reality to place data into the real-world environment. Mixed reality, therefore, will reinvent the entire storytelling process. It merges narratives. It presents users with an experience that is virtually indistinguishable from real life. So the idea of mixing AR and VR is still being explored. So digital imaging, interactive design, information architecture, virtual reality, and augmented reality are areas where we should be seeing explosive growth and development and creative innovation in the near future. And then we'll look at how to use that in branding and in marketing, and how design is going to be playing a role in that.